All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the Mainly Hoops podcast, where we've got some best bets, Cody's best bets for the next few days. We're going to dive right into Kentucky at Louisville. Cody, who do you got for this game?
Yeah, rivalry game here, so I don't want either side coming at me if when I take a particular side here, but I'm going to be on Kentucky plus 3.5 here. This just isn't really a number that I get to. Like, plus 3.5 is kind of insinuating that these teams are equals, and while Kentucky isn't at full strength, I would still view them as the better team at this point in time. Like they've made some major adjustments on the defensive end, at least from last season. They've looked really good through the first two games at the very least. And I know the offense looked a little bit clunky from them in game one. You know, they went through some scoring droughts against Nichols, but they also didn't have their point guard in Jalen Lowe, a guy that I'm extremely high on to at least have like a bounce back here when it comes to efficiency. You know, the guard coming from Pittsburgh, I think surround him around better players, and I think he's going to be just fine here. And you know, I'll never really be that low on a Marco offense in general. I know it doesn't have much shooting, but this offense is gonna do a lot of other things extremely well. But I also just like how this defense kind of matches up against Louisville. I think they can slow down this perimeter offense as good as any defense can. You know, there's a lot of shooters on this Louisville team. You know, starts with Isaac McNeely and Ryan Conwell and Mikal Brown, Adrian Woolley coming off the bench, and they have like some bigs that can space the floor as well. And Ali Khalifa, he can shoot everyone on the floor that they throw out there as a shooter. But I think Kentucky's scheme, you know, their drop coverage scheme, their ability to stay connected on the perimeter, how switchable they are on the defensive end, and the fact that I think they have the physicality edge in this game really at all five positions. Front court's probably pretty even, but on the perimeter, I think there's like a pretty distinct size and athleticism advantage that Kentucky can kind of take advantage of on both sides of the ball. So I'm mostly just playing the number here, but I do think this is like probably going to be one of the harder matchups Louisville has from, you know, matching up with a defense. And this will just be the toughest matchup that they've had probably all year and will have all year.
Yeah, it's a big in-state rivalry, so I'm personally pretty excited to see how it plays out. Next, we have Wake Forest and Michigan. This is at a neutral site in Detroit. But Cody, what are your thoughts on this game?
Yeah, I'm gonna go back to the Wake Forest well. I went there a lot last season, and honestly, I had success like betting on their sides. Obviously, they didn't have the year that I expected them to have. Like I had them rated in the preseason, like I believe I had them top 25, and they finished outside the top 60 or 70. But I was still somehow winning on these sides. But I actually do like this team a fair amount this year. I like them catching 12.5 here against Michigan. I like how their defense matches up with Michigan's offense. I know they might get smoked on the glass, and you know, who's not going to get smoked on the glass against the Axel Lendeborg, Morris Johnson, and Adai Mara. Like, I think even if a team emphasizes defensive rebounding, I don't really think you're going to be able to keep this team off the glass for all 40 minutes. But I do think Wake has the advantage in the shot volume department is forcing turnovers. And Michigan, I think this is another issue for them this season, but I do think the turnover battle heavily favors Wake in this ballgame. Their new scheme as last season, you know, they got a little more aggressive in pick and roll, and I think they can force guys like Cadeau and Lendeborg to make some poor decisions with the ball in their hands, and you know, be able to create some runouts and create some easy baskets that way. But I'm also fairly high on this Wake Forest offense compared to, you know, kind of how they're perceived at this point in time. I just like a lot of the additions that Steve Forbes was able to get in the portal this offseason, like guys like Makai Mason as you know, more of a secondary creator, but I'm pretty high on his level scoring ability overall. And then Cooper Schwieger coming from Valparaiso, I really like him as the two-way center. I like him more on the defensive end, like in this scheme that, you know, puts a lot of pressure on his centers to recover on the defensive side. Like, you know, when you're high hedging, you obviously need to recover back to the rim. And I really like how Cooper Schwieger is in this role. And I think he's a versatile offensive piece as well. And I also really like a year two lead from New Paris. So he's he didn't have a great year last year. He didn't shoot it at a super high level, but I definitely think there's more in the tank. And I think there's true 3-level scoring ability with him as well. they brought in a new assistant coach to kind of run, to run the offense. He's the offensive coordinator, if that's what you want to call it. And they're kind of modernizing the offense a little bit, turning it into like they want to get up and down a little bit more, like making a more like dribble drive oriented offense. And I think they have a lot of pieces that fit together. First last year, they probably had more individual talent with Hunter Salas and Cam Hildreth as individual scorers, but they were asked to, be the point guards for that team, and they're really not initiators, and there wasn't really off-ball shooting around those guys. But I just think this is the Wake Forest roster that, fits better together, and I think there's a bounce back here on the offensive end, and Steve Forbes really found something on the defensive end last year. So I'm just higher on this team, and like 12.5 just isn't a number I could get to. I would probably have this set in single digits around like 9 or even like 8.5 is where I would make this number.
All right, then moving right along to Creighton and Gonzaga. Who do you like for this game, Cody?
Yeah, I like Gonzaga to take care of business here. I'm gonna lay the 9.5 here. I think it's mostly because of the matchup. I don't like betting games strictly off of matchups early in the season. I think you need to exploit like inefficient numbers before you exploit before you exploit a matchup. But I do think Gonzaga is just a really good spot to succeed here against Creighton's defense. That particularly on the interior, I think Gonzaga has a major advantage. And Creighton typically likes to single cover the post, and you're not going to be able to do that. That's great. Enough. There's no Ryan Kalkbrenner on this Creighton defense anymore. It's going to be Owen Freeman really as the rim anchor for this team, but I don't think he can single cover either Huff or EK. So especially EK, and I think he draws that matchup early in this game. So if Creighton's going to have to either dig down or double and force themselves kind of into rotation, I think that's a very poor outlook for this Creighton defense that is definitely less athletic than most defenses, and at least at the power conference ranks. And it's not a defense that you want to kind of scramble around, because you need athleticism if you want to be in a scheme that emphasizes more recovery. But ultimately, yeah, I kind of like where Gonzaga's defense is at right now as well. They kind of impressed me on that number one. They've got themselves all the way up to like 10th in KenPom defensively. I don't know if I buy them all the way up there. I'd have them more in the 25 to 30 range, but their offense is always great. And for Creighton's offense, I'm just a little bit lower on some of the pieces that they brought in. I've talked about a little bit in their team preview and like portal review and stuff. I'm not all that high on Blake Harper, or I like Nick Graves. I think he's kind of proved me wrong a little bit to start the year, but I don't trust him with the ball in his hands consistently against power conference competition. So I'm kind of lower on this Creighton team on both ends, and I think Gonzaga is a team that's kind of been slept on since their non-conference last season, where they were fairly unlucky. I've mentioned that a few times. I just think this is a team that's undervalued right now.
So those are your top 3 bets. Do you have any other games you kind of favor one side, or what are your thoughts on the rest of the field?
Yeah, I mean, I had a couple that I was considering. The first one being Dayton plus 7.5 at Cincinnati. I'm pretty down on the Cincinnati offense. I'm not sure how many people are that high on it right now, but I think the absence of Jalen Haynes, I think he's out with a knee injury right now, and I think he was really going to be the guy that kind of turned around the shot diet of similar offenses that were very mid-range heavy, didn't get to the free throw line at a high clip. Like Jalen Haynes is a guy that can get to the rim at a super high rate and in turn generate a lot of free throw attempts for this team. Like he was going to be, he was my like X factor when we talked about Cincinnati and then the previews and stuff like that. And now the front court of Mustafa Cham and Baba Miller, who are really good defensively. They're very good rim protectors and they're versatile. They can defend in space, but they're not really getting to the rim at a super high clip on the offensive end. I would call them more play finishers when it comes to scoring at the rim. And that's kind of the theme with this offense, is just a lack of an ability to get to the rim. And when you don't have like a fantastic perimeter offense to kind of offset that, I'm definitely going to be lower on your offense in general. And I think Dayton is a team that can really slow the pace down overall. Like, typically Anthony Grant teams sit outside the top 250 to 300 in pace, and I think that's what they're going to look to do here. They played against them last year, and I think they kind of got smoked. But I do think this is the Dayton offense that I think can have success against the deep drop coverage of Cincinnati. Like Dayton's not a team that emphasizes getting open catch and shoot threes because Cincinnati's not going to give you those anyway. So I think they can kind of take advantage of the shot creation over the course of 40 minutes. And another guy that I like is the center for Dayton, Emil Latong, who can kind of space the floor in pick and pop situations. So I think if you can draw Chom and Baba Miller away from the rim, I think that can create more opportunities for the Dayton offense as well.
Anything else you like? Anything else on your radar, or is that the big one?
Yeah, I had one other one for Tuesday. I would just say watch out for Murray State against SMU tomorrow. I think they can really hang around. I think they're a super live dog. This is a roster that I particularly really like, particularly in the front court. I mean, it's a high major front court overall. You have Fred King, who was sitting behind Ryan Kalkbrenner for 3 years. I think he would have started on a lot of high major teams. And, Murray State ended up snagging him. I mean, this is one of the Creighton assistants taking over for Murray State, so it made a lot of sense for him to end up going to Murray State and just following him. He's going to be a great protector. It's going to be a very similar defensive scheme for the most part that Creighton would run, like with their what they call the Kalk drop, really, with McDermott with his defense. But they also have Dylan Anderson, who started his career at Arizona, 7-footer. He was at Boise State last season, so they have really strong defensive backbone. They have a bunch of other high major pieces here, and I think they do all of the right things to kind of slow down this SMU offense. Like, they'll value taking you out of transition, and SMU for my money, I think a little more transition reliant this year than their half court offense kind of perceives to be. I don't really think those guards are going to play off of each other at that high of a level. I think it's more of a, for me, it looks like it's more of like a your turn, my turn kind of offense that you kind of have to rely on dribble creation and getting to the rim. And I think when Murray State has a strong like power conference rim defense led by Dylan Anderson and Fred King, I think they can hang around at the very least, and I think they could potentially be live to win that game. And then I'll just mention one for Wednesday, Minnesota plus 7.5 at Missouri. I really like what Minnesota has done so far. There's a couple of games, but they handle business in those games, and I just really like how their offense kind of fits right now. And Kate Dyson has been awesome after a really poor year at UNC. It was kind of just a throwaway year, and he just didn't really fit there at UNC. He was awesome at Belmont 2 years before that. He shot it over 40% in both years before he went to UNC, and he's lighting it up currently for Minnesota under Nico Medved, who's putting him in much better spots to succeed. And they have some other great creators and guys like Chancey Wills and Isaac Osama, who I'm pretty high on as a two-way guard. And yeah, ultimately, and I think Minnesota can kind of keep Missouri out of transition overall. And this is a Missouri offense that I think could be a little transitional lamp just because of their lack of off-ball shooting. So, and I think Minnesota can do a good job of keeping Missouri away from the free throw line. I know it's going to be difficult guarding guys like Anthony Robinson and Mark Mitchell, especially with the points of emphasis this year and free throws being so high. It's going to be very difficult to keep them off the free throw line for 40 minutes, but I think they can do just as good of a job as anyone. So I really like the matchup for Minnesota. This is a team I was high on going into the season. They've kind of, so far, proven me right. I know it's been a couple of games, and Missouri's defense has been pretty leaky as well. So I like how Minnesota can exploit that.
All right. Thank you, Cody. That was some good picks. We're going to look forward to seeing how those play out. As always, thank you for listening to the Mainly Hoops podcast.